last time we started looking at feasibility analysis. So, I will do a very quick review of the points I made last time, so that the case study I am going to discuss, there is some continuity and you do not get lost in terms of what I am talking about in the rest of this lecture. So, let us go back and look at an earlier slide. We said that the steps in the feasibility analysis are to note down the deficiencies in the current system found while finding out the SRS document. That is, while preparing the SRS document, you will find out the deficiencies in this existing system, and you have to set goals to remove these deficiencies, and these goals had to be quantified. As I pointed out, quantification means some numbers have to be there. It can't be just saying do a better job, or something like saying decrease the cost, but I have to say decrease the cost by how much. And then the goals can be met by many alternative methods, and so we have to find out the alternate methods of meeting the goals, and finding out the ultimately find out the best alternate method. Best alternate method will be one which will give you which will meet all the goals at the minimal cost, and that is essentially what the alternative should be. Now, we are in the feasibility analysis, we also have to see whether the goals which you set, it is possible to meet these goals. Sometimes goals may be set which you may not be able to fulfill, and you have to find out the cost of meeting each of these goals and the cost benefit analysis, because one of the major purposes of the feasibility study is to come up with a cost benefit analysis given to the management, so that they can decide whether to go ahead with implementation of the system or not. So, in terms of finding out the goals, you have to first get the deficiencies in the current system by pinpointing missing functions, unsatisfactory performance, excessive cost of operations. And we gave some examples which again I will come back to later in this lecture, and goals are to be set to remove these deficiencies and provide a competitive advantage. Goals, as I said, must be quantified, must be realizable within the constraints of the organization and the system, and they should be broken down into sub goals, because unless you break up a large problem into smaller problems, it will be difficult to tackle the problem in any systematic way. And whatever goals you set should be agreeable to all concerned. That means, everybody who is involved in using the system as well as implementing the system. And in general, goals must not only remove deficiencies, but also give a system which is superior to those of competitors of this organization. In other words, a good system would be one which gives a competitive advantage to the company for which you have done this job. And we discussed a case study of improving the operations of a hostel mess last time, and we found out the number of deficiencies in the current system of the mess. We said that the missing functions were stores requirements were not forecast, purchases were not consolidated, daily rate calculation was not frequently updated, menu was not planned for balanced nutrition and cost, and billing was not accurate and prompt, and student bills are not itemized. this is all bad performance or unsatisfactory performance. And stores issued to cooks is arbitrary, payments to vendors is not prompt, and large variations in mess bill every month, which students do not like. And unpaid bills from students for which are long outstanding, because if bills are not paid in time by students, that means there is going to be a ultimate cost or the increase in the bills of other students, because you effectively have to pay interest on that outstanding amount. Extras and rebates are not reflected in the store's issues. In other words, whenever a student has extras or he brings in new guests and so on, you should reflect that in terms of issue. And similarly, when students go away on leave and they are not going to use the mess, you should be able to reduce the amount of stores which is given to the cooks. And we found that the cost was high operational costs were due to frequent small purchases of items because of not consolidating the requirements, and so the cost became high. And because if you buy in bulk, there is a discount. If you buy only small amount, there is no discount. And high transport cost due to not consolidating stores requirements. You have to make several trips to the town to buy items, and it may bring up the cost or increase the cost. So now the goals, as I said, are formulated to remove these deficiencies, and so the goals also should be quantified. So I am formulating the goals now to for this system, namely the system for making the mess accounting and mess issues and so on better, and so that the overall satisfaction of students is better by setting certain main goals of whatever system I want to implement. For ultimately we have to meet these goals by implementing some system, and I will discuss later on what are the possible systems which can be used to implement these goals. Now, one of the main goals is to send bills to students within 5 days of the end of the month. The idea, again, you see it is quantified. It says 5 days of the end of the month. It is important to kind of say that, do not say send bills to students soon after the end of the month. Soon after is a unquantified item. 5 days means it is exactly, that is, in other words, 5th or before the 5th of every month you have to send the bills. The reason you have to send the bills within 5 days is to ensure that the students are given a certain amount of time to pay, and they have to pay within 10 days of receiving this bill. Something like that, some number can be specified, and if they delay beyond that date, then they are essentially called up and asked for explanation, or even their mess facilities may be stopped. Okay. Control inventory of items in stores and issue to cooks to bring down the cost of mess bill by 10%. That is, again I have quantified it. That is, the goal is to reduce inventory and give the correct amounts to the cooks and so on, so that there is no wastage, and which will ultimately bring down the mess bill. So I set a goal saying that I would like to bring it down by 10%. Balanced menu to meet nutritional requirements, because this is not quantified in the normal sense of I do not have a number, but balanced menu really means, if you are a nutritionist, to say how much of carbohydrates, how much of vitamins, how much of other proteins and so on have to go in. So that can in fact be quantified and many nutritionists, particularly in hospitals, make a menu for this purpose. But of course, in hostels you can't be all that strict in terms of the nutrition as looked at by a nutritionist, but by and large you have to have a balanced menu in the sense that there should be certain amount of carbohydrates, certain amount of protein and things like that. And the cost of the new menu must not exceed the current cost. So, that is quantified in some sense, in the sense that you know the current cost. If the current cost is say 50 rupees, the new menu should not cost you more than 50 rupees. In fact, we said that it should be brought down, and that is the primary goal. And itemize the bills showing extras and rebates with dates, because that is again one of the goals I am going to set, and I will say later on what these are going to kind of meet. In other words, let us just look at the if you itemize the bills showing extras or rebates and dates, the deficiency in the current system, namely non-itemized bills and students not knowing what they are paying for, that deficiency will be removed. And you ensure less than 5% variation of the bills from month to month. So, that is one of the deficiencies we said was that there is a wide variation in the bills from month to month. So, this way you put a 5% limit on the variations, and how you do it is also you have to consider. How it is done is to be looked at in some detail. Now, the other sub goal is bills not paid within 10 days of the issue is brought to the attention of the chief warden. As I said, within 5 days of the end of the month, the student bills are issued, and if it is not paid within 10 days, you bring it to the attention of the chief warden. You update daily rate every day. So, that effectively what it really means is that the variations in the mess bill will be reduced. If you look at the main goal M1, the main goal was source requirements was not frequently updated, okay, and the sub goals were in terms of the removal of not itemizing bills and the variations in the bill and so on. So, I will not go back to those transparencies because of the fact that you can actually look back and look at them, but I will explain what each of them is actually meeting. Ensure payment to vendors within 5 days of supply of items. Now, the whole idea of ensuring payment to vendors within 5 days of the supply of the item is it will meet the goal of bringing down the mess bill from the existing value. Okay. So, it is if you are prompt in paying to the vendors will also reduce their cost to you, and if they reduce the cost to you, ultimately it is going to reflect in the mess bill. So, the idea is to gain you quantify it. You say within 5 days of the supply of items I am going to pay him, and if he is sure that within 5 days of the of his items being issued he is to get the money, then he will be quite amenable to give you better rates. Okay. And you reduce the trips per month for purchases to 4 and cartridge less than 1% of the item cost. So, the whole idea is that if you consolidate all your requirements and have a very clear inventory control system, then you can reduce the number of trips to the city, and that will bring down the requirement for What I mean by cartage is the transport requirements, transport cost of transporting items, and reduce inventory level not more than 10% of requirements of a month. So, this again is quantified, that is, you have an existing inventory level, reduce it to bring down to not more than 10% of the requirements. Issue to cooks every day not to exceed 5% of the calculated values. So, all these main goals and sub goals are effectively to remove the deficiencies which have been stated earlier. So, you go back and look at all these deficiencies, and I have stated them here, but as an exercise and to just review, you go back and look at them and convince yourself what I have said in terms of the removal of the deficiencies. The numbers are given there, you can go back and look at those numbers and see if it is all right. So, now we have come to a stage where we have set certain main goals, quantified main goals, and certain sub goals, and whatever system you want to implement now has to meet all these main goals and sub goals. So, at the end of the implementation time, one would judge the efficacy of your system by comparing what you promised with what you achieved. So, it is very important for you at this time, when you formulate the goals and the sub goals, that whatever goals and sub goals you are proposing are achievable. Do not promise the moon. In other words, if you say I am going to bring down the mess bill by 25% and still give balanced menu, it may not be feasible at all, because I said one of the things about feasibility is that the goals should be realistic within the operational constraints and within the other constraints that are operational in the system. So, you have to be somewhat conservative in setting your goals. If you say that I will bring down the mess bill by 5% and you bring it down by 10%, everybody is happy. If you bring it down by 2% or there is no change, everybody is unhappy. So, the whole point is that it is better to be conservative and not be too optimistic. One of the problems with many of the smaller software vendors who develop software for companies is they go and promise certain things which are not achievable. Within the time constraint and within the kind of capacity or whatever constraints are operational, both physical and time constraint, and that creates a certain kind of a, what I would say, credibility gap on computerization, and this credibility gap has to go. So, one should be able, as I said, to meet whatever one promises. So, this is very important. Now, once you come up with all these goals and sub goals which are achievable within the constraints, now the next step is to see how you can implement it. One always assumes, particularly in a course like this, where we are really talking about computer based systems, that one has to use a computer always. It is not always true. Sometimes for smaller institutions, the feasibility analysis and goals which is set at the end of the feasibility analysis can be met by improving the existing manual system or implementing some new manual systems. So, do not assume that the system is going to be always based only on a computer, but by and large it turns out that many systems which are implemented have computers as an important component of the system, and even then no system is entirely automatic, in the sense that it requires people to operate them, also people to use them effectively. So, all systems ultimately will be a combination of a certain number of manual operations which you do, combined with a certain number of computer based operations, or what operations the computer does. Let me give an example of what I mean by this. We looked at the system where number of items come into a supplied by a vendor to a company, and then the items are inspected and taken into store. In this case, obviously the inspection process of inspecting the items is a manual process, but at the end of the manual process the inspector or inspectors who did this job, instead of writing it out on a document, may actually enter it on a keyboard, which is again a manual process. So, the inspection process is manual, the data entry is manual. So, it is not as though the whole system is automated, and so one has to keep in mind that all real life systems will have humans as an integral part, and certain procedures which humans have to follow will become important parts of any system which you implement. So, there is a need for also procedures which are easy for people to follow. So, that is one thing we have to always keep in mind when designing a system. And people, as you know, have their own drawbacks. In other words, have their own the probability of a person making an error in keying in some data is not 0. There is definitely a finite probability that some wrong number will be entered, because it is a manual process. One also of course tries to see if some of those manual things which are routine clerical can be automated, but not everything can be automated. Ultimately people are important, and you have to also keep in mind that people have certain characteristics, and people are not automatons. They will become tired, they will make errors and things like that. So, all that has got to be kept in mind while designing a system. So, in this case, for the hostel or mess management system, not the hostel management system, as I pointed out at the very beginning, we are only going to look at the improvement of the mess, because the wardens said that the other aspects of the hostel, namely room allotment and things like that, are not all that critical at this time, and whatever they are currently doing is going on smoothly. And the only thing where they are finding it somewhat unsatisfactory is the area of billing for the mess. That is where the daily rate variations are wide and generally students are unhappy. So, at the end of the fact gathering stage with the wardens, we found out that the mess management system is the one which has got to be improved. So, there are three alternative solutions which we look at. One is to improve the manual system, the existing manual system, and can you improve this manual system, and or use a PC based periodic update system. In other words, use a PC which will do all the calculations and data entry and so on, which is done there, and it will be along with the people there. It does not be automated, obviously. And a third possible solution is an online system with a server with several clients. What I mean by this is that if it is a use a PC based system, means that in the main mess office, where the mess in charge, who normally will be a clerical person, will be given some instructions and forms to enter, and based on that entry onto that PC and the programs which will run the PC, whatever goals I set in the feasibility analysis will be met. So, in this case there is only one PC in the main office, mess office, and that will effectively be sufficient for doing the type of job we want to be done. The other possibility, we will look at online system, means that there is a network, there is more than one computer, and there are certain terminals or PCs which are connected to a network and a server which does all the calculations. So, these are three possible solutions. Let us look at one by one what the advantage and disadvantage are, and whether they are really feasible in terms of meeting our main goals and the sub goals. Manual system may be improved as follows: keep up to date running total of extras and rebates of each student. In other words, you keep a register in the mess where he eats, and whenever he takes extra rebate, it is entered there by the mess supervisor, and at the end of the day you have a clear idea of how many extras are there and what kind of how many students did not come and so on. So, in other words, you can systematize the manual system by requesting that requiring that the students inform you at least 3-4 days ahead of time. Some dates can be set if they are going to not eat in the mess for a few days, and the exact number of days you are not going to give. So, that if you note down, that will help in controlling the inventory or items being issued to the cooks in the mess, and buying vegetables, milk, stuff like that. Okay. So, there is a up to date running total of extras and rebates. Use a lookup table to find materials needed for each day based on the number of extras. In other words, you keep a clear, you might say just a table saying that if these many students are there, this is the menu, these are the items to be issued, and based on that you issue the items to the cooks. So, it is kind of that table is decided by consulting with the cooks what they require, and of course, the mess supervisor is supposed to be in the know of things in terms of how much is to be issued and so on. Of course, he will have a lot of experience of running messes in the past. Cost each day's issues and keep a running total. The whole idea of keeping a running total after costing what is issued each day is, if from that you can actually find out the daily rate, and the daily rate variation can be controlled. Suppose your a certain issue for a particular day, cost of a certain issue is 5,000 rupees on a particular day, and next day it becomes 8,000 rupees. That means there is a strong variation. So that means either you had more expensive items, or that you had too many people, but you can correlate it with the number of people and so on. Calculate standard quantities needed and use it for vendor order. In other words, for the actual month, you can calculate based on the average number of students who are there. In fact, you could actually do a statistical calculation in the sense that you can look at the past 2-3 months and find out the average based on that, and based on the average number of meals cooked every day and different meals, for instance breakfast, lunch and so on, you can decide how many quantities, what items are required, how much quantity is required and so on, and that can be used for the vendor order. Track student payment to find out overdue payments. That is again that is manual. The solution does not entirely ensure reduction in bill variations and prompt payment to vendors, because it only says what order to give to the vendors. Solution is not scalable. That is the whole problem. In other words, it may be all right if you got a mess with 50 students. Like your home, you got a small number of people and you don't really go through all this business. Okay. And if it is a small mess with 50 students, so the manual process will work very reasonably effectively. But if the number of students increase to 500 or 1,000 and so on, then the manual process will break down in the sense that the variations will be too much, and calculation time will be too much, and it will not be very easy to do the computations properly. Okay. So, the point I am trying to make is the advantage of a computer comes out much more clearly when the volumes increase. When the volumes are low, very often it is found that the manual method is good enough. Let me take a very simple example. If you have a class of 30 students and you are giving the tests and so on and grading it, and at the end of the term you have to find out the grades of these 30 students and find out which class each student is in. It is much easier to kind of sit down and do that manually. But if you have a lack of students, like in an examination, big examination, it is humanly not possible. It will take too long a time. So, one has to look at situations where it is worthwhile writing all these programs and doing all this work, and a general rule of thumb is the process is going to be for high volume, and it is going to be repetitive. It is going to be repeated again and again and again, month after month after month. Then the cost of writing the programs, creating a system and so on will be amortized. That means it will be averaged out over the lifetime when you are going to use it. So, the point is that it is not worth computerizing anything unless it is going to be repetitive, going to be used again and again and again many times. The more times you use it, the less is the average cost, and the more is the volume you are going to deal with, the more essential the machine becomes. And that is one point you have to always keep in mind at the back of your mind. It is not necessary to plunge ahead and use a computer in every case. If it is a small kind of a thing, it may be quite sufficient to do it manually. Maybe I am a little old fashioned, because nowadays for everything people just go to a PC or laptop and do things, but I am really talking about real systems in real life, okay, where it is important to keep in mind the fact that repetitive use is the one which is going to pay off in the long run. Solution B: use a single PC to prepare student bills and itemize the bills. See, bill preparation is an automated process. If you write a small program, and it can nicely print out and give a nice printout to the students, and you can itemize the bills. Whereas in a manual process, to itemize each bill in terms of extras, rebates and so on, it will take a long time, and as the number of students increase, this itemization will become impractical. Whereas in a machine, that is 500 students or 5,000 students, doesn't really matter. The machine is going to take a slightly longer. Okay. Prepare number of members who will eat for the next 2 days. That is based on the information which is to be provided by a student about whether he is going to use the mess or not use the mess, whether he is going to bring guests or not. So these things you expect the student to give a certain amount of notice. So in this case I am assuming that the notice is given for at least 3 days ahead of time. If it is given 3 days ahead of time, then for the next 2 days you can calculate, prepare the number of members, and based on that you can find out the inventory requirement. That also can be done by a computer program. Alert warden when a bill is not paid within 10 days of issue. In other words, when a bill is actually issued 5 days from the end of the month, and as soon as the payment is made, that is entered in the PC, and the date due and the date on which it is paid is compared. If 10 days after the date due students are not paid, that exception list, as it is called, can be prepared by the machine, because all this is stored in the machine, and that list can be sent to the warden for action. You can create the vendor order generation, that is based on the items to be purchased, you can create an order for the vendor, and you can control the inventory of the store, and you can also do a menu planning with a computer program. It is a very interesting kind of a problem of menu planning with the computer. In fact, I know a particular mess where they did a menu planning very effectively, because again menu planning, as I said, we have to meet certain nutrition requirements, and we also have to keep some variety in mind. You also have to see to it that the same menu is not repeated every day, and you have to kind of randomize the way in which menus are prepared, so that one can't predict that every Monday you will get certain thing, every Tuesday you will get something else. So it's some amount of randomization, and a good menu planning system meeting these constraints, they also try to use the vegetables which are available, which are seasonal and which are also not very high cost. So, you can make some kind of a menu based on available vegetables and so on, and try to reduce the cost, at the same time balance the menu. In fact, I know of, as I said, a case where they actually did it and used very interesting operation research techniques to do this, in terms of, because operation research techniques, as you know, are the ones which use a set of requirements within a certain constraints. In this case, the requirements will be to meet certain nutritional requirements, okay, and the constraint would be the cost of the what you get ultimately. So, this small interesting kind of applications of operations requirement, operations research has been made in menu planning, and if you do a clever job of doing that, you will essentially get you will get the respect of the students also if you are doing it yourself. Now, the PC configuration needed is based on database sizes. In this case, we are talking about 500 students. The database is not going to be very large, and in fact, you may work with 20 MB disk and 1.2 MB floppy would be sufficient. But nowadays, of course, even if you want to buy a 20 MB disk, it is just not available. The minimum PC configuration you can buy would have at least 40 GB disk and 128 MB main memory, and year after year, as you know, these numbers also increase. From 40 GB, next year it will become 80 GB as a standard, and 128 MB may become 256 MB, because the cost is coming down even with the increase in memory sizes and increase in speeds and so on. And in fact, floppy is more or less going out of fashion. You get all these flash memories which are replacing the floppies, and even though that is the case, floppy memories are still available, okay. And CD rewrites, which are standard, which are required to load your programs and keep backups, archival storage and so on. So, sometimes it turns out that your sizing of a computer may be conservative, but that sizing may not be available. In other words, what is available is something which is much higher, much bigger than what you really require, but you have no choice. You have to buy whatever is available. But from whatever is available, you can of course buy the one which meets your requirements and which is the cheapest. Okay, and I am estimating the cost of such a system as 25,000 rupees. And as I said, these numbers are not sacred. Today I may say 25,000 rupees. If you are doing it 3 years from today, you may say the same thing costs 15,000 rupees, because all the time prices are reducing. But it is not always true in some sense, because configuration increase to make the cost same. Okay, so the cost remains same, but your configuration, you get more and more powerful machines for the same cost. And you need an operating system. I am assuming a Windows XP and an MS Office plus antivirus. These are all essential software. So one might say, why not use an open source like Linux and OpenOffice and some open source antivirus. It is also feasible, but by and large it turns out that people are comfortable with the Microsoft type systems, and you can find many more people who know how to operate it with that system. Whether it is good or bad, I am not giving any value judgment on this. And this extra software will cost you approximately 25,000, and I am assuming that you buy it from the market, and even though some vendors say they will preload it, the preloading may not be a legal copy. If you are buying it for a hostel or a company, it is always a good idea to buy a legal version, because the legal version gives you the assurance of updates, assurance of support, and so on. And so it is important to have official or versions which you buy from the market, and it is not a good idea to say pirate it. Pirating is similar to stealing, okay, and there are stringent laws against stealing software. So it is very important to keep in mind that whatever software you use in any implementation for any company and so on should all be legal. So I am assuming the total cost is about 50,000 rupees for this PC and software and so on. You need a printer to print out the bills and so on, and you may decide on a dot matrix printer, because you don't really require graphics and stuff like that. And dot matrix printer, the advantage of buying a dot matrix printer is that the cost of supplies is lower. You know, the printer like an inkjet printer gives you nice outputs and so on, but the refill for the ink is too expensive, very expensive. In fact, they make more money on the refills than on the inkjet printer, whereas in the case of a dot matrix, it is a lot more rugged, it will run for years. The original cost will be slightly higher, but your running cost will be much lower in terms of the fact that you have only ribbon has got to be replaced. Okay. So in any situation where you have to create a lot of bills and so on and give it to students, or in any situation where you have to create an inventory list and vendor indents and so on, it is a good idea to use a dot matrix printer rather than an inkjet printer. And you of course use an uninterrupted power supply, okay, because power, as you know, is endemically there is a problem in terms of failure of power, and you cannot afford to have failed power, particularly in a system which you are going to be dependent on. Okay. Solution C is to use a server which is accessed by 3 clients, one each in the mess and in the stores and the account section. The advantage of this is that in the mess supervisor enters as soon as a student takes some extras and so on, and at the end of the day you have an up-to-date value of the number of students who ate in the mess that day and what extras are given and so on. And the stores also, as soon as a stores is issued, you can note down and it updates the stores online. And the accounts will continuously update the bills paid and bills to be paid and so on, and so there will be a you might say up to date picture of what is happening everywhere. So up to the minute status can be found, but it is not essential in this case, okay, because you are going to prepare the mess bill only at the end of the month once, and so having everything up to date is not essential. Once a day, at the end of the day, if I am able to find out how much items are to be issued to the store the next day, and 2-3 days ahead I know how many students will be eating and so on, that is sufficient. So up to minute is not required. The time constant in this case, the interval between which you take decisions, is something of the order of a day, okay, and so you really don't require an online system, okay, which does a immediate update and stuff like that. Further, The solution C, as I said, number of transactions small and does not justify 4 computers, and solution unnecessarily expensive and not necessary, and so we reject it. Okay. So, solution A was rejected because of the fact that the manual system is not feasible when the number of students increase, and in this case there are 500 students, next year it may be 800 students. Okay. And so there is no point in having a system which cannot be upgraded with the passage of time. So, solution C is rejected, but it is too expensive. So, we take solution B, which is sufficient for the particular purpose, and it will meet our goals and sub goals, and the meeting of the sub goals and goals is based on the programs you are going to write, which are going to ultimately meet the goals and sub goals. Now, to evaluate the alternate solutions, determine technical feasibility of each solution. In other words, is technology mature to implement a solution, okay, and determine operational feasibility. In other words, for a given organizational structure, will the solution be possible? Will it fit in? Will it provide the right information at the right time to users? This is the operational feasibility. And the economic feasibility, that is whether will it be cost effective, will the money spent be recovered by savings or by better services to users. Okay. So, there are 3 kinds of things, as I said. One is technical feasibility, operational feasibility, and economic feasibility. Okay. Solution B is selected for further consideration because technically it is feasible. A PC can be bought, but the point is that ultimately the PC has to be items to be entered there and so on is to be done by a clerk. So, question which may arise is that is it operationally feasible? It is operationally feasible provided the clerk is given enough training in terms of how to enter, how to correctly enter, and so on. So, you know the clerk does not have to kind of know programming and stuff like that. He only has to have a clear understanding and education on proper data entry without making any errors. But as I pointed out, you cannot assume that everything will be entered without errors. There will be errors. So, you got your program has to take care of the fact that there will be errors, and the errors will be detected by the program. Data entry, at the time of data entry, that will be checked by a program, and the program will throw out incorrect entries and so on. Okay. Later on in this course, we are going to talk about methods of ensuring that entered data is reasonable and it is not incorrect. Okay. And so those are important, which we will discuss later on. So, it is operationally feasible in the sense that I can train the clerk to do it, to enter the data and so on, and it is technically feasible because PC are easily available. So, economic feasibility has to be essentially found out. So, it is operational feasible because clerks and hostel office can be easily trained to use a PC, and the necessary problem will be written by a systems analyst programmer hired for the purpose. In other words, as I said, the clerk only enters the data, the programs have to be written to meet the goals and so on, and the programs are written by programmers and analysts you may hire for the purpose. In some places they try to use students themselves to do that, and there are good well educated students who know programming fairly well. It may be done, but by and large it turns out that students are a floating population. Okay, they will be here for in the college for a few years. By the time they develop this program, they may be in the 3rd year or 4th year, and they are going to leave. And because it is their part-time hobby kind of a thing, they may not really document it very effectively or correctly, and there is no responsibility later on to keep it going. So, it is a good idea to essentially hire a professional help from say maybe a company, and that company will be held responsible to maintain or continuously update as the requirements change from year to year to year. So, the point I am trying to make is that you have to hire an analyst and a programmer from a company to kind of get this, first of all design the system. The analyst design system, as I said, he is an architect of the system, and the programmer is going to implement the program, okay, for which is there. So, need to find economic feasibility of the proposed solution. What is meant by economic feasibility is to find whether returns by implementing a system justify the cost. Cost benefit analysis, and found by listing all costs direct and indirect, and then computing the benefits also. In this case, direct cost is the cost of computer, software, space, human resource, material, travel, training, etc. Of course, in our particular case example, there is no question about space, cost of space, because it is an hostel office where already there is a clerk and maybe his typewriter is removed and a PC is put. But space becomes important in many companies which are situated right in the middle of place like Mumbai, where the cost of 100 square feet of area may be even more than the cost of the person, the salary of the person. Okay, so space cost becomes important in such situations, and human resource cost, of course, in this case is important. That is whatever you are going to pay. Material is in terms of consumables you are going to consume. Okay, and travel, in this case no travel, and training is the training of the clerk. In this case it may not be very high. So, the point is direct cost involves all these things. Indirect cost is time spent by persons in data gathering and so on, and the benefits are both tangible and intangible. Tangible is measurable, so many rupees I am saved. Intangible means I have better management, better user satisfaction and so on. So, in this example we have taken, we will look at both the tangible benefits and intangible benefits, and we also will find out the total cost. We only found out the computer cost, that is the capital expense. We also have to find out the running expense, month after month, how much are you going to spend. Okay. So, next time we will look at the cost benefit analysis by adding up all the costs and finding out the benefits, and find out methods of quantifying the cost benefit analysis. Thank you.